Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cruz.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call up my amendment OLL 21432. This amendment goes directly to the question that Senator Kennedy was raising, and both of the sponsors of this bill have repeatedly represented that participation would be voluntary, that it was not mandatory. What this amendment does is it makes clear that that's the case, and that it is the case for employees as well. So this amendment does two things. It, number one, says that an employer can't report on an employee's demographic characteristics without that employee's consent, that it's up to the employee whether that information will be reported. And then secondly, it says that the employer cannot take adverse employment action against the employee if he or she chooses to deny consent. And so this amendment, both of the sponsors have argued eloquently that this should be voluntary. Well, this amendment ensures it's voluntary not just for the CEO, but for the individual inventor or researcher.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Hirono.
voluntary means voluntary. That's it. So it's very clear that no employer can force the employee who happens to be part of a patent application to disclose anything. That's voluntary. So your amendment, Senator, adds additional unnecessary requirements that have no practical benefit. Voluntary means voluntary.
If I could ask Senator Hirono, what additional requirements that have no benefit?
Oh, the requirement to get an express consent
You just said it was voluntary.
from the individual.
But you just said it was voluntary. So
So why does there need to be an express consent if the employee doesn't, if the employee doesn't want to participate, disclose that information, doesn't have to do so?
How is something
Why is there a
voluntary
need
if
for
there's
an
not
express consent?
And is it an unnecessary protection to protect the employee against discrimination and an adverse employment action? Why is that unnecessary?
It's voluntary, so any employer who will take action against an employee based on something that is a voluntary action on the part of the employee, I would say that employee probably has some other kinds of actions to pursue.
Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Senator Kennedy and then Senator Leahy.
I think we have unity and confusion here. It's either voluntary or it's not. Now, and I'd like to vote for this if it's voluntary. But I don't see the harm in Senator Cruz's amendment. The holder of the patent either gives consent or she doesn't. Now, she has to give informed consent, I assume. That means they have to tell her it's voluntary. But I don't understand what we're arguing about here.
Senator Kennedy, the person who is involved gives consent by disclosing the information. That is consent.
But if I'm a patent holder.
This is not like some operation that you have to give informed consent on.
But
It's totally voluntary.
But you said, Senator, I'm really trying to understand why you're disagreeing with Senator Cruz's amendment. If it's voluntary, if I'm a holder of the patent, and you come to me and say, Kennedy, do you want to disclose? And I say, no. That's what Senator Cruz is giving me the right to do. And it would seem to me if it's voluntary, as you say, and I believe you, Mazie, what's the problem?
The problem is that this amendment is not necessary. If the employee does not want to disclose that information as part of a patent application where this information, by the way, is kept totally separate, that information is not given.
That's what
And
Fed
that is
say.
it.
That's what Cruz
That
is
is
saying.
it. That is the decision.
What's wrong with
So-
belt and suspenders?
Mr. Chairman, if I could
You know,
mention,
why do we want to add additional language that doesn't add anything to the purpose of this bill, which is simply to collect data that we currently don't have? And don't we want a vibrant patent system where
Of course we do, but that's not the
understand-
subject,
so let's-
Senator. That's not the subject. The subject is
This-
the definition of voluntary, and if there's disagreement, between the bill's author and a member of this committee, that leads me to believe that it may not be as voluntary as we would like it to be. And I want us to go full voluntary.
And Senator Hirono, I have to say, I don't understand
Well-
the response that you're giving, because your first response is this amendment is unnecessary because the bill already does it. And your next response is, but the amendment is really burdensome. It can't be both unnecessary
I'm not saying it's
and
burdensome, Senator Cruz. I am saying it is unnecessary. There's a difference.
So if it's
Between
unnecessary,
burdensome and
why wouldn't
unnecessary.
you just agree to it? If the bill already does what this amendment says, why wouldn't you agree to the amendment? If your argument is your bill already does this, what is the harm of this amendment?
Why are you proposing an amendment that is unnecessary?
Because I want to protect the voluntariness of the inventor.
Senator Leahy.
Mr. Chairman,
We obviously have a disagreement.
I think this amendment is actually,
Excuse me, could we ask this huddle over here to please quiet down? Thank you. Senator Leahy.
you know, I fear that the amendment is in search of a problem that doesn't exist. Senator Hirono is clear. The bill makes it clear that disclosure of information on the part of patent applicants is voluntary. Any demographic data collected voluntarily under this bill is going to be kept confidential, separate from the patent examination process. There was a great deal of work done by Senator Hirono and Senator Tillis and Senator Coons, Senator Grassley, myself, in putting together this bill to make sure that that we don't have unnecessary things in, to have a bill that will stand scrutiny legally and all, and for those who haven't worked on the time that Senator Hirono has in doing this, might not fully comprehend that, but I think it's a amendment in search of a problem. I'm going to oppose it, and certainly there was nothing in the long hearing that Senator Tillis and I had that would suggest a need for it.
Senator Tillis.
Yeah, Senator Leahy took the words out of my mouth. With this relatively new amendment, at least for me, in consultation with the USPTO, they seem to suggest it's a solution in search of a problem. However, so I will be opposing the amendment, but I do want to go back through to the point that Senator Kennedy made. We can go through a few use cases and see if this is something that we should pin down after it gets voted out of committee, but I will be opposing the amendment on the vote.
Senator Cruz, you want to close debate on your amendment?
I think we've had sufficient debate. It's worth having a vote, and I'd ask for a roll call.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy.
No.
Mrs. Feinstein. No. Mr. Whitehouse.
No.
Ms. Klobuchar.
No.
Mr. Coons.
No.
Mr. Blumenthal.
No by proxy.
Ms. Hirono.
No.
Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla. No. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Graham.
Aye. By proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
Aye.
Mr. Cruz.
Aye.
Mr. Sapp.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Hawley. Aye. Mr. Cotton.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy. Yes. Mr. Tillis. No. Ms. Blackburn.
Aye by proxy.
Chairman Kirby. No. Ms. vote ayes are 8 and nays. What are the nays? 14.
The ayes are 8 and nays, noes are 14, and the amendment is not agreed to. Are